Mr. President, I just flew in from Chicago. Early this morning, I was given the news that I'd lost a great friend and one of my dearest colleagues. Senator Frank Lautenberg of New Jersey passed away. Most of us saw Frank just a few weeks ago. He was here on the floor of the Senate. He had to come down. It was one of those moments where his vote was crucial. And we knew that he was struggling, but we also knew he'd be here. He said he would, and he was. He sat just right over here in a wheelchair with that trademark Frank Lautenberg smile. I don't think I've ever run into a person in my life as happy as Frank Lautenberg. He was a great joke teller. And the best thing about Frank's joke, even if he was telling it for the 254th time, he would start laughing before the end of the joke, and pretty soon the whole room was laughing. You always wanted to be out for dinner with Frank and Bonnie because you just knew it was going to be a good time. You'd hear a lot of jokes you'd heard before, but you encouraged him to tell them. He had so many stories to tell. Here he was, a member of the greatest generation, having served in World War II and served here in the United States Senate. Two different approaches. He retired once and came back, served here to the age of 89. He astonished us all when he came here on the floor of the Senate, that he was wheeled in a wheelchair to vote on some important amendments related to gun safety and gun control. Frank, if he were alive, would not have missed those votes. It meant so much to him. It was an issue that he led on, he was respected for. When it came to closing the loopholes where convicted felons and people who had no business owning guns were buying them anyway, Frank Lautenberg led the effort to stop the proliferation of guns and the distribution of them to people who would misuse them. It was a cause that he felt passionately about and one he cast many tough votes on as he served in the U.S. Senate. His return that day for those votes was an act of courage in a long life that was filled with courage, starting with his service in the United States Army in World War II and continuing throughout his life. Physical courage, political courage, and moral courage. When Frank Lautenberg spoke to some law students at Rutgers University about 10 years ago, he said he'd considered briefly studying law himself after he'd served in the Army in World War II, but decided he was 25 years old after World War II and too old to start law school. He told the law students it was too late. I'd missed my opportunity. Well, Frank Lautenberg may not have earned a law degree, but make no mistake, Frank Lautenberg of New Jersey left an important mark on the laws of America. Here's how I first came to know him. I was a congressman in 1986. I had been here 4 years. I was from Springfield, Illinois. I'd never met Frank Lautenberg of New Jersey, who was a senator at the time. And I got this crazy notion to introduce a bill to ban smoking on airplanes. And I didn't have a chance, not a chance. The entire leadership of the House of Representatives opposed me. All the Democratic leaders of my party and all the Republican leaders too. And yet, I put the amendment on an appropriation bill, a transportation appropriation bill, and through some good luck and breaks, it made it through the Rules Committee. That wasn't supposed to happen. It turns out that Claude Pepper of Florida, the chairman of the Rules Committee, when he was a senator years before, had been instrumental in starting the National Cancer Institute. As a Southerner, he didn't talk much about tobacco. Nobody did from the South in those days. But in his heart, he knew that tobacco smoking was killing people. He let me get that amendment to the floor, which shocked everybody. And I remember the day, this goes back quite a few years now, it's 27 years ago. I was in the House of Representatives, brand new, calling this amendment to ban smoking on flights of 2 hours or less. That's how we started. And I looked up in the gallery, and the gallery was filled with flight attendants in their uniforms from all the different airlines. They were victims, too, of secondhand smoke. Well, we called that measure for a vote, and it passed. It just shocked everybody. And it turned out that the House of Representatives was the biggest frequent flyer club in America. They were sick and tired of sitting on airplanes and breathing in somebody else's secondhand smoke. Well, there were a few moments of jubilation and celebration, and then somebody said, well, what are you going to do in the Senate? And I thought, oh my goodness, that is an important part of this. So I decided to call the chairman of the Transportation Appropriations Subcommittee, a fellow named Frank Lautenberg of New Jersey. I didn't know him, but I said to him, Frank, I'd like to ask you a favor. Would you consider offering this bill as an amendment to the Senate Transportation Appropriation Bill? He said, I'll get back to you. And he did, in a hurry. He said, I'm on board, let's do it together. Well, it was the best phone call I ever made. And for the people of this country and those who fly in airplanes, that team of Lautenberg and Durbin managed to pass a bill signed into law which did much more than we ever dreamed of. We thought this little idea of taking smoking off airplanes would make flight a little more comfortable and safer. From a health point of view, what neither Frank nor I realized at the time was it was a tipping point. Americans looked around and said, if we're going to take smoking off airplanes, why stop there? Trains, buses, offices, hospitals, restaurants. Just look across the board what's happened in America. Neither Frank nor I saw this coming, but it worked. It's changed this country. It's changed the Senate, the House, it's changed this country. And I wouldn't be standing here today telling you the story were it not for Frank Lautenberg. He was just the very best partner I ever could have had. Well, the day came when I was elected to the Senate. He and I used to go around and tell the story from time to time, reminiscing about that battle back in 1986. Frank told us he was once a 2-pack-a-day cigarette smoker himself. But when it came to this bill, he knew the right thing to do. And I was lucky to have him by my side. I couldn't have done it without him. He was the driving force behind a lot of other laws that were important to America too. Setting the national drinking age at 21, setting a national blood level definition of .08 for drunk driving. Just these laws on smoking and drunk driving saved millions of lives thanks to the leadership of Frank Lautenberg. He was the last remaining World War II vet in the Senate. Just a few weeks ago, we lost Danny Inouye, who used to sit right here. He, of course, served in World War II as well. He passed away, Frank did, early this morning in New York. He's survived by his wife, Bonnie Engelhardt Lautenberg. What an extraordinarily good person she is. I left a message for her on her voicemail, said, you know, standing by Frank's side made a big difference in his life and in the years that they were together. They were a great, great partnership. In addition, he is survived by children, 6 children, 13 grandchildren. He was a leader on environmental protection, transportation, protecting public health. He authored the law that prevented domestic abusers from possessing guns. It wasn't an easy thing to do. It looks pretty obvious, doesn't it? Turned out police organizations were opposing him because policemen, some of them, had been accused of domestic abuse, and they couldn't carry a gun under the Lautenberg Amendment. Frank stood his ground. He co-wrote the new GI Bill for the 21st century. A man who was a beneficiary of the original GI Bill in World War II teamed up with Jim Webb, the state of Virginia. And the two of them put together a GI Bill that our men and women who served are richly deserving. He authored the Toxic Right to Know law. It was another great law that he and I co-sponsored. It came down to a question of the chemicals that are put in fabric in our furniture, which sadly are leached out and get into the environment of our homes, many times affecting small children. Frank was quick to be the leader on that issue, even though his state of New Jersey is one of a lot of chemical manufacturers and producers. He led in this effort to protect families and children. He wrote the law to create the Patterson-Great Falls National Historic Park. After he cast his 9,000th vote in December of 2011, Senator Harry Reid proclaimed on the Senate floor, Frank Lautenberg has been one of the most productive senators in the history of the country. Well, it was February 15th that Frank announced he wasn't going to seek another term in the Senate. At the time of his announcement in his hometown of Patterson, he set out an agenda for the remaining 2 years of what he wanted to get done before he left the Senate. reforming the U.S. chemical safety laws, improving gun safety, and providing federal resources from New Jersey to rebuild from Superstorm Sandy. We owe it to Frank and his memory to make sure those things are done. I know that Bob Menendez, his friend and close colleague from New Jersey, will pick up that gauntlet and proceed to carry on in Frank's name. He used to say with some pride that he was a success in business, and he was, and that he understood the mind of a businessman, but he never ever lost touch with the common man and the people who counted on him in New Jersey and around the United States. The United States Senate is going to miss Frank Lautenberg. I'm going to miss a great pal. I'm going to miss one of the best dinner companions you could ever dream of here in Washington, D.C. We're going to join together on Wednesday up in New York for a memorial service. I'm sure it's going to be widely attended because Frank did a lot of things for a lot of people over the course of his years of public service. I'm going to miss him. Mr. President, I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of quorum.